Thanks very much, Gemma, and thanks to everybody for attending today. It's really good that we've managed to generate so many people who are interested in this really important development. The first thing I'm going to say is this is a really tough time for businesses right across our borough and indeed across the country, of course. And we've heard some really heartrending stories already over the last few weeks about businesses who are struggling, and your employees struggling in this really difficult environment. As you know, in Cheshire West and Chester, we've been through a whole set of different regulations in terms of lockdown and restrictions over the last few weeks, and every one of them has affected business in one way or another. So from, I think it was the 19th of October, we were in what was called Tier 2, which meant that there was restrictions on household mixing. And we're now, of course, in a national lockdown. And I think, we can all go, we'll all have different views about the balance between the restrictions that government's introduced and public health. All I will say about that is that, in Cheshire West, like many other parts of the country, we were seeing quite an acceleration of cases of COVID-19. And we were beginning to see quite substantial pressures on our hospital capacity, with quite a large proportion now of hospital beds in the Countess, in Leighton Hospital, in Arrow Park and Wirral, and Warrington and Halton Hospital and Liverpool hospitals, all affected by the growth in number of cases. So we do recognise why it has been necessary to put some degree of restriction on household mixing and businesses being open. What we also, though, was we made very strong representations to government, and on this we joined with a whole group of local business organisations, the business improvement districts, chambers of commerce, representative bodies, to say to government that we didn't want to see businesses left into a situation where they needed to close down or were beginning to lose many of their customers because of the household restrictions without adequate financial support. And there was a time towards the end of October when, as a council area, we were left in a bit of limbo. I think one business described it as a purgatory, where the household mixing restrictions were severely limiting the number of customers that many businesses could attract. But because we weren't in the highest tier of restrictions, we weren't receiving at that stage the financial support that our businesses really needed. And I know that was a really difficult time for many businesses. We're now, of course, in a different environment where the national lockdown arrangements have come into being. In Cheshire West and Chester, there isn't that much discretion in respect of those national regulations. They're pretty much the same everywhere across the country, and we've had to adapt our own services in the light of those regulations, as I'm sure every business has had to do as well. In many cases, the regulations require business premises to close altogether, although, as you know, there are some exceptions to that. But I suppose perhaps in recognition that the government hadn't moved quickly enough under the previous Tier 2 arrangements, we did see an extension of the furlough scheme, which is now in place until March. And then there's the focus of this particular meeting now, which is the grant schemes which government has enabled local authorities to deliver. And as you'll hear, there's a mixture there of grants which are mandated by central government, so they're going to be the same everywhere across the country. But there is also a degree of discretion for different local authorities to apply some flexibility about the application of those regulations. And we think that's a really positive thing, because for those businesses that were involved in some of the earlier business grants that applied back in the spring, we did have a problem that there were a lot of quite hard cases and difficult areas where businesses found it was sometimes a bit restrictive to be able to get support. And it was only when we were enabled to have a little bit of local flexibility that we were able to provide the finance that a wider number of businesses needed. So one of the positive aspects of the new grant regime is that local councils have a higher level of flexibility to be able to support businesses in different circumstances, reflecting that every business will have its own story about how these restrictions are impacting upon them. So this is really good timing for this for this meeting. I hope you make use of the opportunity to ask questions, and that you're able to listen to the information that we're able to impart to you today. Just to introduce a couple of colleagues who are on the webcast today. So you've heard from Gemma, who's the director in the council responsible for our work with business. We've also got Catherine Walker, who's our head of economic development, appearing on the screen now with our corporate background. I've also got Ian Patton, who works in Catherine's team and is leading many of the day-to-day relationships with local businesses across the borough. We've also got Ian Radcliffe, who's our head of communication, so he'll pick up any questions that we've got about how businesses are kept informed and communicated on issues. And Jill Williams, I think, also on the call. Jill, who again is one of our business advisors, who played a really important role in the last lockdown, providing advice to local businesses about how to access the support that was available. And I'm sure Jill will become very familiar to you as well if you've got questions you want to ask of the team. We've also got colleagues, I think Simone and Chris, who are helping with the IT and helping this webcast to work effectively. But I'm now going to pass over to another colleague, Jude Green. Jude is head of our transactional services team, so she's responsible for the mechanics of all the council's payments, to our suppliers, to our staff, to our pensioners. But most specifically for this, she's responsible for the operations of our business grant process. So she will be able to describe the new rules better than anyone, particularly since Jude has actually been part of the national advisory group, which has helped the government to design these grants in the first place. So is particularly well placed to help us navigate the complexities of government grants. Over to you, Jude. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining us. Jude will take forward the presentation on the grants, then we'll open up to questions after that. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so my name is Jude Green and I am head of transactional services. So I have the task of administrating the business rate schemes, or the business grant schemes you've currently got going, of which, as I go through my presentation, you are a number. I'm going to apologise in advance that some of my slides are a little bit busy, but I've tried to pack in as much information as I possibly can to be able to answer some of your questions, or preempt some of your questions, or the questions that you may have. So I'm going to turn my camera off now, and then we'll just go through my presentation. So bear with me. Next slide, please, Chris. So the purpose of my presentation is to provide you all with an overview of the financial support schemes that the government have announced recently. I'm going to talk through the process about what happens when an application is received, so you can understand how the services are trying to deal with the different schemes and what we're trying to do to be able to get the payments out as quickly as possible. We know how important these financial schemes are to all businesses, but there are only so many numbers of staff that can actually deal with them. So if I talk you through the process, you'll understand what we're trying to do within the services. I'm going to have a go at providing some answers to some frequently asked questions, and we picked up some questions that came around the last time we went through the business rate grants. And then as Andrew has alluded to, I'll be able to answer a few additional questions, hopefully. But if I don't have all the answers, then obviously I'll be able to go away and we'll be able to get answers out to you going forward if I'm not able to provide you with a satisfactory answer today. Next slide, please, Chris. So just a little bit of background for you, which I'm sure you're all aware of, is that on the 19th of October, the Cheshire West and Chester, we entered Tier 2, the high alert level of restrictions. And then on the 22nd of October, the Chancellor announced that areas within Tier 2, the high alert restriction areas, would receive grants to support businesses in certain sectors. We started work at that point then with putting together a policy, but we were waiting continually for government guidance to be able to shape the policy, and unfortunately the guidance didn't come through, but we understand why now, and that's because on the 31st of October, that's when the Prime Minister announced a national lockdown from the 5th of November to the 2nd of December, and then he also announced there would be further support to businesses made available. So as soon as we received that information, we started working very hard on what we were going to do, what it meant to the previous schemes that had been announced, what we were going to do going forward. And then finally, on the 3rd of November, we and all other councils received the formal guidance in relation to currently the four business support schemes. Next slide, please, Chris. Now, this is very small, and it just gives you an idea of the schemes, and the terminology used on here is the terminology used by central government for what they call the schemes. But from a business's perspective, we understand that, you know, it's not important what it's called, it's important that you're able to access the funds if you're eligible. But I just thought that this would give you an idea and illustrate what we're looking at here. So we have four schemes for us at Cheshire West and Chester. We're in a high alert area, or we were up to the 5th of November. So we would have we're with the local restriction support grant open, additional restrictions grant, and the local restrictions grant for sectors, and I'll go through those. And then overarching that is the local restriction support grant closed, and that is the funding that the government looked at for the national lockdown. So any grant, so the local restriction support grant open and the local restriction support grant for sectors, those were suspended on the day before we went into national lockdown to enable the government to put together the new 4-week grant schemes from the 5th of November. This just illustrates that we are working alongside 4 different schemes at the moment. Next slide, please, Chris. So the financial schemes are available. So there are grants for non-essential businesses with a rateable value that have been forced to close during the national lockdown. There are grants available for non-essential businesses without a rateable value, and these will focus on those businesses that cannot open or operate as normal and whose normal business model is therefore significantly affected. There are grants available for the businesses in leisure, accommodation, and hospitality sectors that were affected by the Tier 2 restrictions. And those grants will be made for the 17-day period from the 19th of October, when Cheshire West and Chester moved into Tier 2, until the 4th of November, when we went into the national lockdown on the 5th of November. And then there are grants available for nightclubs, dance halls and discotheques that have not been allowed to open since the 23rd of March, according to Part 2A of the Public Health Control of Disease Act 1984. These grants would be paid fortnightly, but if any business has reprofiled themselves, for example, if a nightclub has turned itself into a bar, then they would be excluded from receiving this particular type of support. Next slide, please. So what I've done is I've kind of tried to break these down to give a bit more information about each one of them. So the financial support scheme, so the scheme, there is a scheme for the period the 19th of October to the 4th of November, and this is the one where we were in the Tier 2 high alert restrictions, and this one is specifically around hospitality, leisure and accommodation sector. The businesses that are in those sectors must have been trading up to the 19th of October, and the funding that is available has been prorated down from a 28-day payment to a 17-day payment. The payments are based on rateable value or a flat rate, and then I've listed the individual areas where they would be, which would be if you have a rateable value of 15,000 or less, the prorated amount is 567. A rateable value between 15,000 and 51,000 will receive a rateable a flat rate payment of 850. And businesses with a rateable value of £51,000 or more would receive a flat rate of £1,275. What we have done with this particular scheme is we have opened it up a little bit wider than the government guidance for properties that were rateable, and those with a rateable value. So those businesses without a rateable value will receive a flat rate of £567 for that 70-day period. Next slide, please. There's a scheme available to nightclubs and dance halls, which I alluded to. And that is basically where a nightclub, dance hall or discotheque has not been allowed to open since the 23rd of March, and that's in line with legislation. We have no discretion for each of the 14-day periods that they must remain closed. They're not eligible, as I said, if they've been repurposed for other items, such as a nightclub turning into a bar or restaurant. They must have been open up to the 23rd of March. And the value of the payment is dependent on the rateable value. And again, around this, we have no discretion. So businesses with a rateable value of £15,000 or less would receive £667. Businesses with a rateable value over £15,000 would receive less than 51,000 receive £1,000, and those businesses with a rateable value of £51,000 or over will receive a payment of £1,500. If businesses are eligible for this particular scheme, they will receive their payments 2-weekly. This scheme came into force on the 1st of November and it was suspended on the 4th of November. So any payment would be prorated from the 1st of November to the 4th of November. And then if this scheme was to continue post-lockdown, we would then be awarding any grants to individual businesses on a fortnightly basis. Next slide, please. So there is a scheme available to non-essential businesses with a rateable value that have been forced to close during the national lockdown from the 5th of November to the 2nd of December. The business premises must need to have a rateable value on the 5th of November, and is a non-essential and forced to close from the 5th of November, but was trading up to that date with in-person services. The amount is dependent on the rateable value and the council has no discretion over this. So businesses with a rateable value of £15,000 or less will receive £1,334. Businesses with a rateable value of over £15,000 but less than £51,000 will receive a payment of £2,000. And businesses with a rateable value of £51,000 or more will receive a payment of £3,000, and that is to cover off the period of the national lockdown. Next slide, please, Chris. So the final scheme is the scheme available to non-essential businesses that don't have a rateable value. So these grants they will be focused on those businesses that cannot open or operate as normal, whose normal business model is therefore significantly affected, and they must have been trading up to the 5th of November. In most circumstances for this particular scheme, a fixed payment of £1,500 will be made for the 4-week period of the national lockdown to eligible businesses. Next slide, please, Chris. So there are general conditions applying to all 4 schemes. So I've just listed the general conditions applying to each. Businesses that are in administration insolvent or have been issued with a striking off notice, they are not eligible for any funding. Obviously, only businesses that are based in Cheshire West and Chester Council, within the Cheshire West and Chester Council boundary, can apply for a grant. And businesses must have been trading normally, and I use inverted commas there because we have been in a different world for some time this year, up to and including the day before the restrictions were imposed for the scheme of application. So it will be the 23rd of March, 18th of October and 4th of November. And applications must be made to the council via an online form. Next slide, please, Chris. So our application process, we have tried to make it as simple as possible from the front end for businesses to make an application. You only need to submit one form unless you are applying for more than one premise. So if you think that your business would be eligible for 2 of the 4 schemes, then you would need to complete one form. If you have more than one business, then you would need a business premise, then you would need to complete 2 forms. And as I said, what we will do then is we will make the decision of which schemes that the business is eligible for when we're actually doing the processing from within the office. If you are a business that has a business rate account number, that would speed up the process for us. And also on the application forms, we need clear and accurate information, as inaccuracy can lead to delays because we have to make queries. We do require some evidence, so if you are making an application and you could have this to hand, this will make it easier for you to go through the application form. And that's your business name, business address, account number if applicable, and that is you'd find that on your business rates bill, and it will start with a prefix 600. Company registration number if applicable, VAT registration number if applicable, business bank details because we are making these payments into your business accounts, and those businesses without a rateable value that cannot open or operate as normal during the national lockdown and whose normal business model has been significantly affected, they will need to provide details of income and a bank statement from the 1st of September. When the applications are received, we receive them in bulk, and as at 3 o'clock this afternoon, we had received 1,020 applications. There are 2 small teams that are working their way through the applications, and what we initially have to do is we initially have to sift through those applications for those that have got business rate numbers and those that haven't got business rate numbers. Those individual businesses that have got business rate numbers are being dealt with by the revenues team. So we've called in resources from our council tax team, our corporate debt team, and of course our business rate team. And they will be making payment through our revenues system academy. And for those organisations that don't have a rateable value, they will be dealt with within another team within the council. And they are sifted out and dealt with separately. So the individual officers then that are dealing with these application forms will be assessing which schemes that individual businesses are eligible for and making payments for those 2 or 3 or 1 business rate scheme. Okay, thanks, Chris. Oh, there's still more slides, Chris. Sorry about that. So how will payments be made? All organisations, it's a requirement of each of the schemes, will be contacted by email to advise of the outcome of their application. We will also acknowledge when we receive an application, and we will also acknowledge if businesses are not eligible for a scheme. The email will state that by accepting the grant payment, that the business confirms they are eligible for the grant scheme and that any payment accepted will comply with state aid requirements. State aid requirements are quite complicated. If you are a one sole business, then state aid requirements probably wouldn't impact you. But if you have received state aid of up to €200,000 and another payment would take you over that, then you're not eligible to apply. We do aim to make application payments within 3 days of a decision being made, and we will be doing that by direct credit transfer. And it's important that organisations and businesses supply the correct and up-to-date bank account details as part of the application process. When we are making a payment, the details that you submit on your application form have to be exact to your business bank account. Otherwise, our payment file will fall over. We're currently looking at making decisions on applications if they are straightforward within 5 working days, but we are obviously receiving a high volume of applications. It may take a little bit longer, but we are aiming for 5 working days. And if applications are a little bit more complicated, they may take up to 10 working days. We would ask politely that you don't submit a duplicate application because that will delay payment being made on the first application that you put in. Next slide, please, Chris. So I've put together a few frequently asked questions. We've got more frequently asked questions that we've put on our website, and we are going to update them as we get questions through. But these are just some of the questions that we've had over the last week or so when the announcement was made, and that's, you know, is there a date by which a business needs to have been trading in order to be eligible to receive a grant under the scheme? And I've alluded to the fact that what you need is that you need to be trading up to the day before the restrictions came into force. Where can I find my business rate number? That's quite a common question that we get, and we understand that some people receive their bills and then don't look at them again. It's usually in the top right-hand corner and will have a prefix of 600. How long will it take to process my application? And I've kind of answered that one, that we are experiencing a high volume. We have put as many resources against the process as possible, because we understand how important it is for us to provide you with the funds. But we are aiming within 5 working days, but we know that some applications will take longer, up to 10 working days. And then once a decision has been made, we would aim to have the money in your bank account within 3 working days. Next slide, please, Chris. A question that has been raised through the advisory group as well as to the council directly is, can businesses with mixed premises and only part of the business is subject to national closures apply? And yes, if a business is required to close its main service, what we'll do is we'll exercise our discretion and use our local knowledge of that business to ascertain whether or not they are actually entitled to receive funding from the scheme. For example, if a pub obviously has had to close its doors but is doing takeaway, then they would be entitled to funding through the scheme. Can parish halls and community halls apply? And the answer to that is yes. And the reason why I put that on my slides is because we had quite a few questions about that in our previous grant schemes. What businesses are classed as non-essential? The government has now provided a list within its legislation, and I've asked for a link to this legislation to be placed on our website, so that if people are unsure if they are essential or non-essential, they can actually go and have a look. It's from paragraph 29 of the legislation when they start to list it. And can businesses that are eligible but don't want or need the funding, can they opt out? And the answer to that question is yes. If you wish to decline a grant, you can decline a grant. And from that then, I will hand over to Catherine with a few more slides.
Thanks. Before we pass on to Catherine, Jude, thanks very much for that presentation. Just while Catherine's getting her slides together, can I just pick up a couple of immediate questions, Jude, that have come up that you can probably respond to pretty rapidly. So I've got a question from Rod Cox, who asks, can businesses in the sort of personal service, sort of nail bars, that sort of business, he's talking about a number of businesses on Northgate Street in Chester, are they eligible, and under what basis would they be eligible? And I think Mr. Cox also makes some points about how in certain parts of the borough, and again he's pointing out Northgate Street, it's not always possible for businesses to have the pavements wide enough to be able to do al fresco dining, so therefore they're limited in the ability to sort of diversify their business in the light of the new regulations. Rod, I think we'll pick that up with the team that we have working in the city centre in Chester, who are looking at the alfresco dining opportunities, and ask them to look into that issue for you more generally. But just on the business support point, Jude, are you able to provide some information about those types of businesses and their eligibility?
So Nail Bar, I would assume, would be providing in-person services, and therefore would be also classed as non-essential and required to close. So I would say yes, that they would be eligible for support through the non-essential forced business closure grant for the national lockdown.
Thanks, Jude. And also have a question from Karen Hemmings, who asks, what if a business can prove that they're operating, but they don't themselves have a business bank account? Can we make arrangements in those circumstances?
Yes, we would probably need to have a conversation following the approval of the application about how the payment could be made, and where the payment were to go. But we would be able to do something, yes.
Okay, thanks for that, Jude. I'm going to hand over to Catherine now. I'll take further questions when we've heard from Catherine. So Catherine is our Head of Economic Growth, responsible for the Council's relationship with business, and she'll describe some of the other more general support arrangements that are in place to help business at this difficult time. Catherine, over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. I know you'll have lots of questions, so this is just very, very brief in relation to the support that we might offer now or in the future. So in addition to helping businesses understand and navigate the grant application process, the Council's business team are on hand to help understand and navigate the other government and non-government support schemes still available to businesses, to employees, and of course to the self-employed. There's loads of schemes out there: furlough, self-employment income support, deferment of VAT and time to pay tax schemes, loans, the new Kickstart job placement programme. There's so many different ones out there, and it's hard to know what is and isn't current, and importantly what you might be eligible for, and this is where we can help. We also provide a comprehensive redundancy service, so whether a company is in the early stages of considering redundancies or have already made the decision to lay off staff, we can deploy the right support needed at each point of the process. We'll work with you on a completely confidential basis so that you can understand the options open to you, and we will provide help to employees, for example, to find alternative work, gain new skills, or navigate the financial environment for them that's available to them as individuals. In addition, our regulatory services team can help you to understand and interpret the government guidance for non-essential business closures, and they will work with you to explore proactively what a business could do to change an operating model to allow you to continue operating. We've loads of experience of interpreting the guidance. So for an example, where a retailer that ordinarily would be non-essential but they supply an essential service, just as an example, they can work with you to determine whether you could stay open or whether you needed to operate on a click and collect basis. There's a helpline number for you to reach them, and businesses can call for one-to-one advice. In turn, our advisors can tap into central government advisors as needed to gain clarity on specific and individual cases. Next slide, please, Chris. It's probably worth me adding that whilst COVID response is of course a thrust of our focus at the moment, we can also help businesses to scale up as well as scale back, and the various components involved with doing either of those. We work with a network of partners locally, regionally and nationally. At this time, some businesses may well be looking at the new skills that they need to run their businesses in this new environment. There's programs such as Accelerate that can help with that, help with providing funding for that. It's just one example of several ways in which we will work with you to understand what your business needs. Next slide, please, Chris. Alongside this, of course, we can't forget that we are heading towards the EU transition period, as if we need anything else at this time, with major changes coming into force from the 1st of January. So we've partnered with West Cheshire and North Wales Chamber of Commerce to give businesses in West Cheshire free access. You'll get one-to-one guidance and advice of what you need to do to prepare if it's relevant to you. You don't need to be a member of the Chamber through our agreement with them. And it also extends to access to things like their startup club for businesses that are less than 2 years old, digital marketing support, and the access to finance service. So if anyone wants any more information on any of the support that we've got available, do get in touch or visit our website, which you can access through the council website. I'll go back to you, Andrew.
Thanks, thanks very much, Catherine. So I think now we'll open to questions, and I'm just going to start with a clarification of Rod's question. So Rod, I think you were asking specifically about personal care businesses who had sort of restrictions affecting them during the Tier 2 period. So that's between the I think it was the 10th of October and the 5th of November. Jude, I think it's we can be clear that those businesses are eligible for support and should make an application under that aspect of the grant regime.
For the Tier 2, it is predominantly for hospitality, leisure and accommodation. And those we have chosen as a council to pay within the government guidelines for the tier 2, and for the tier 2 at the moment, for those 17 days, retail is not included in that tier 2 directly. So it would be really difficult for me to give a definitive answer either way. I would need to look at an application, if I'm honest, Andrew.
Thanks, Jude. I think in these circumstances, what we'll do is we'll just ask businesses to put in an application and describe how they were affected by those regulations, and we'll see what discretion we can apply over and above the minimum requirements that government set out, and if necessary go back to government and seek further clarification of that. So please don't hold back from putting in an application, and we can deal with these situations on a case-by-case basis. Hope, Rod, that provides you with some answer to that question. I've also got 3 hands up from Anita, Magda and Christopher, so if I can start with Anita, if you want to come forward and put your question. Hello, Anita Langford. If you want to unmute and put your camera on, you can ask your question. No, okay. Oh, I can see you now, Anita. I can't hear you though. I think you're on mute.
Andrew, I think Chris just needs to disable the mute.
Yes, it took me a while to find Anita on the list. It's a big one.
Sorry, Anita, that was our fault. Chris. That was our fault. The perils of being the first one up. I think you may be able to unmute yourself now, Anita.
Can you hear me now?
We can now. Thanks and sorry for that.
Oh, hello? No problem. Yeah, I'm a treasurer for our local community centre here in Tarpley, and we can apply for the grant. And I've already had a look at the grant form, and there's a question about the number of employees. It is a sort of just run by the trustees. I assume that, like for every other form, etc., that we fill in, we class the number of trustees as the number of employees. Is that correct?
Yeah, sorry, Anita, that came out of the blue from central government, that we didn't initially have that on our application form, but we've been requested now by central government to put that question on our application form. So yes, just complete it as you normally would. That would be great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jude. It sounds like that's needed more for national statistical purposes than it is for our own internal purposes. But yes, please complete that. Magda? If you just wait a minute until Chris disables the mute.
Sorry, struggling to find. Oh, there she is. Right, got it.
So many people on this call. Okay, over to you, Magda. I think you can unmute yourself now.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Yes, so my question is, actually, we own in the shop on the Watergate Street. It's called Vitamin Shop, and we tend to sell supplements for people who basically attend the gyms and do the sports. And I'm not sure how we are classed as non-essential or essential shops to be open, or are we eligible actually for the grant, because we lost all our clients who attend to the gyms, because obviously you close all the gyms, and I wonder how that's going to look like in terms of applying for the grant.
I would suggest you put in an application, and then what we will do is we will look at that, about the impact that tier 2 regulations had on you, and then we can definitely, I would suggest that you will be eligible as a non-essential business for the grant that's for the national lockdown. So yes, please make an application.
All right. Do you have any other questions? No, thank you very much. Okay.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Magda. And I also have Christopher with a hand up.
Hi guys, I'm just wondering if you can shed any light yet on the 6.8 million pound additional restrictions grants, and how and when. We own Boutique Hotel Group and mainly Pepson Castle, so we've been hit pretty hard from a wedding point of view. And whilst the grant schemes are great, they are sort of insignificant to the losses that we've been making since March.
Yeah.
Thanks, Christopher. I mean, actually, I should just say the 6.8 million you refer to there, that's the allocation of funding from the government to the council to enable us to deliver the business grant schemes that Jude has just described. So there isn't anything additional available, I'm afraid, over and above what Jude has described. But that money has enabled us to apply some discretion. So please do put in an application and we can assess it with as much flexibility as possible under the circumstances. And of course, you are right to say that for many businesses, the resources that, unfortunately, the resources we're making available, won't make a big dent on some of the big financial consequences of the lockdown for individual businesses. And we understand that, of course, but we are trying to do the best we can with the limited resources that we do have, that unfortunately will have to be spread pretty widely right across our borough. Jude, do you want to add anything more on that?
Yeah, I have received a letter from Boutique Hotels, and I've asked somebody from the economic business growth team to have a conversation. And that was the conversation that we had, that for the type of organisation that you are, and the level of grants as it stands at the moment, it is quite difficult. So the £6.83 million that you refer to, and Andrew's quite correct, that's the additional restrictions, refer to it as ARG. With the ARG, we have utilised, as Andrew said, we've utilised part of it to be able to make our lockdown schemes more discretionary. But this £6.83 million of funding is not going to be topped up by central government, and it has to last the council until the 31st of March 2022. We are looking at it in tranches, and now for us, the most important thing was to get the first tranche ready to be able to allow some discretion during this national lockdown period. And we will be working as a cohort to be able to see what support we're going to look at past the national lockdown with that specific funding.
Okay, that's great. No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Christopher. So I think the general message is please sort of situation, put in an application, register your circumstances with us, and we can then apply as much flexibility as is feasible to be able to give you at least some of the support that you need. I've got Mustafa with a hand up.
Good afternoon, everybody. As probably some of you know, I own Leonidas Chocolate Shop on Bridge Street. And I have two questions, actually. One of them, obviously, I turned the shop into takeaway once the national lockdown came, which answers kind of given really that I can apply for the grant for the help. So that is correct, isn't it? So I was operating during when the lockdown finished previously, and now we are in a lockdown. I turned the shop into takeaway only. Am I correct?
So when you were working in between the two lockdowns, were you operating as normal, and you've just gone into takeaway now for the national lockdown?
Yeah.
In which case, yes, that goes back to the point where, for example, a public house or a pub, if they just started doing takeaway food, then their main business is still non-essential and closed. So yes, Mustafa, you would, yes, absolutely, not a problem with that one.
Okay. My second question is, I'm involved with two other businesses in Bridge Street, two jewellery shops. Now they are non-essential and they are closed. Now we got a big problem with the rent because our landlords are private landlords, and we are struggling to arrange any kind of rent relief from them, really. So is council able to help us with that at all in any shape or form? Either negotiating or kind of being the middle guy to kind of help us with any kind of
Mustafa, I think that's probably quite a difficult role for us to play, sort of intervening between different businesses. But I mean, if you want to contact the the business growth team with the number that that Catherine put up on the screen. She'll put in the meeting chat as well. We'd be happy to pick up the case and maybe see if we can provide some advice or signpost you to advice in those circumstances. It's probably the fairest thing we can say at the moment.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks. I've got a few questions now in the chat. And can I just also ask, if you put your hand up to ask a question, would you put your hand down again so I don't come back to you twice? Just from the chat then. So this is, I think, similar to one of Mustafa's questions. If a business primarily offers services that would need to close, but one small part is essential, so they could technically stay open for that small part, but clearly, you know, it has fundamentally affected their business. Would they be eligible for a grant? Jude?
I would suggest put in an application, because we would just need to use our local knowledge and look at it. Without knowing specific cases, it would be very difficult for me to say yes, no definitively. So I would just advise put in an application, and then we let it go through the process, and we will, you know, where possible, make it a positive outcome. But we're aware that there'll be some that aren't. But yes, please apply, and then we can put that through the process.
Thanks, Jude. So it does depend a bit on the specific circumstances, but I think the principle that, you know, for example, you have a restaurant, you might have been able to do a little bit of takeaway on the side, but it's fundamentally affected the restrictions have fundamentally affected your business, then we want to be able to support you.
Yeah.
Obviously, as Jude says, we do need to look at the specific circumstances in those cases, but please put in an application. We've got a question from Sean about businesses in the wedding industry. Wedding photographers now, under the new lockdown arrangements, weddings are pretty much cancelled, I think. So there's a business that is undoubtedly affected by the restrictions, Jude.
Yeah. So, and also very probably without a rateable value. So that would come under the non-rateable value route and would be treated as a non-essential business and be eligible for a grant through that way. Great.
So again, stick in an application, Sean. Got another question from Alan. AYE, but take profits at the year end. Is it possible to claim? I can't work normally. Business is gone and income is almost all gone. It's about sound services to churches, and churches have closed. So I guess, Jude, we're in this situation again where the fundamentals of your business has been affected by the restrictions, and we therefore encourage you to put in an application, and we'll look on that positively.
Yes, absolutely. I think that with that one, again, it's the fact that it's a non-rateable value business, so it would go through the discretionary route, and that's what we're using our ARG for.
Yeah, that's a really important point to make, actually, because those involved in the very first business grant process back in the spring, initially they were focused on businesses with values, and we got a lot of really difficult cases where people really needed the money, deserved the money, but because they didn't actually have a rateable value, the government scheme at the time didn't really offer enough flexibility, and it was only later when we were able to apply some discretion and support those businesses. We're now saying, irrespective of whether you've got a rateable value or not, if you are affected by the lockdown fundamentally, then please put in an application and we'll apply discretion to enable you to get that support you need. Okay, I've got a question from Mark in relation to the first question about the number of employees. He has submitted a claim on the 9th of November as soon as it went live, and there was no section in at that time. Does it matter?
No, it doesn't matter.
Just introduced, right?
Yeah, it was actually introduced on the 10th when we had our last advisory group meeting. So our application didn't ask for it at that point. We've since updated our application to include it. We did clarify with central government whether or not they wanted us to go back at that point. We've received 257 applications. Did the government want us to go back and ask that question to the 257 organisations that have submitted an application form? And they said no, at that point they would take it from going forward. So thank you for bringing that up, but no, you don't need to supply it. Thank you.
Excellent. Looks like common sense did apply in that case. That's good to know. Got a question from Geordie, who says, did she say to 2022? I'm afraid, Jude, you did. It was the government's basically telling us that this money has got to last until 2022, which is quite an extraordinary position for us to be placed in. But I mean, rest assured, we are trying to get the money out that we need under this really difficult lockdown period. So hopefully that won't restrict applications, but obviously that's really our challenge, is to try and manage the relatively modest money that we get from government against the really significant need that we see in our local business community. So we'll do our best to make that money go as far as possible. And I've got a question here from Dan. 2 businesses, one is a bar restaurant, the other is an event business, but it is on the same business account. Can we claim twice essentially for both businesses, or is it just for the bar restaurant?
It will just be for the bar restaurant, because the government has stated it's the premises. So if they operate from the same premises, then it will be one grant.
Okay, because it's a single business that just has multiple multiple functions. Yeah.
And I would suggest that that would probably have a high RV, so it would come under the higher rate. Okay, so you'd be able to get make an application on the basis of the rateable value of the restaurant. Might be the best route. Okay. Got another one from Alex. I pay myself minimum PAYE amount and main income is through dividends. Only seem able to be claimed based on the minimum PAYE amount as not self-employed. Is that an issue about the furlough scheme there? I wonder. Yeah, I'm not sure that's business.
I think this may be an issue that needs to be picked up with HMRC by the sound of it, Jude.
Very possibly, yes.
Question from Jackie. Am I correct in understanding there's no financial grant available from the council for July to October? And if this is correct, why? I think the answer is the government hasn't provided any grants for the period where the lockdown was relaxed. So in that sense, there isn't, unfortunately, funding available for that period, during which, you know, many businesses were able to operate, even though, of course, everyone's business will have been affected in that period as well. But sorry, that's probably not the answer you wanted to hear there, Jackie, but I think that's the situation. I can see Jude nodding, so yeah. Yes,
that would be correct. There was the government at the end of the discretionary grant scheme, there was no further funding available. Obviously, then there was some for some councils that had big problems, but it was only in the recent weeks that we've had anything from central government for support for businesses.
Okay. And if I can just come back briefly, we'll bring this to a close in a minute, but just perhaps one more hand up. Jason, do you want to come onto the screen and ask a question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello, yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Lovely. Sorry, it's actually, my name's Laura Haywood. I own the Scented Garden on Northgate Street Row. Thanks ever so much for today. I just wanted to ask, obviously, my business is classed as close contact. We carry out beauty and holistic treatments. We've had to shut along with everybody else. With the nature of our work, and it's classed as close contact treatments, our PPE bill is horrendous. And the question I want to ask is there any other financial help from the grant system for businesses like myself with our PPE bill that we're having to pay out every month, and we're going to be continually paying out by the looks of it as well now into next year?
Thanks, Laura. I think the answer to that question, we can't directly support PPE by private businesses, but we obviously the grant is available and it's provided on the basis you can use that to meet whatever costs apply in your own business environment.
Andrew, could I just add in as well that the LEP have a capital grant programme. Now, the first tranche, I think they've done a couple of tranches actually, so you'll need to, if you go onto the LEP's website or the Cheshire and Warrington Growth Hub website, they'll tell you when the next tranche is opening, so monitor that. There are grants available of up to £5,000 for exactly that, to allow businesses to be able to buy PPE, to make any changes that are needed. If you want to drop us a note, we can either point you in the right direction or go to c&wgrowthhub.co.uk and you'll see the information on there.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Good luck with that application, Laura. So we probably just need to bring this to a close. There's one question we can answer quite quickly. Are these grants repayable in due course like a loan? I think the answer to that is no. These are grants.
These are grants. Yes, that's quite correct. We did say an hour, so I've still got questions. So perhaps what we can commit to is responding to those questions outside the meeting, just to make sure. And of course, if anyone has any questions they want to ask in follow up. Catherine, Jude, did you want to give a contact email address for any further questions that people want to ask?
Yeah, Jill, is it the business one that's probably the best one to use? Jill Williams.
Sorry, what was that? Sorry, yes.
Is it the business email address that's probably best
yes.
for people to use? Could you just read that out for me?
Business@ Cheshire West and Chester.gov.uk.
Perfect, thank you. And we'll pick up any inquiries through the chat as well. So if there's any questions that haven't been answered, we'll go through those and pick them up from the chat as well.
Excellent. Just to finish, there is a request to provide the link for the applications itself, or perhaps we could just help signpost people to the right part of the website. Jude, do you want to do that now, just as we close?
What we can do is we can drop that into the chat, because people should be able to still access the chat. So what we can do is drop it into the chat, because it would probably take me as a non-techie a little while to get it. So yeah. I'll drop it into the chat and people can pick it up from there. And I'm sure that Chris and Simone will help me with that.
It's also readily available from the council's homepage. So if you just go to Cheshire West and Chester.gov.uk, you'll see it right on the homepage there about COVID support and applications.
Okay, excellent. Well, we've got a lot of questions that we haven't had time to answer, and a few hands up as well. So I'm going to have to close it now, because we did say we would run this for 1 hour, and we will commit to absolutely getting back to any questions that have been asked on the chat function, and we'll follow up with everybody who's got their hand up as well, just to make sure that your questions are answered. Thank you very much for attending today. Really appreciate your interest and involvement in this process. We're trying to make this as seamless as possible. It's quite a complicated process, largely because of the way that government has defined the various schemes. What matters to us is that we're able to get the money out as quickly as possible to all those businesses who need help in our borough. We'll do that. We'll try and reduce some of the complexity. We've got what I hope is a really simple process. And as a council, we actually had a pretty good track record last time at getting money out. I think faster than pretty much any other council in the Northwest. So we want to be able to meet that expectation this time as well. And then finally, just best wishes for operating your businesses in this really difficult time. We do recognise the challenges that you all face, and please, on behalf of the council, can I just wish you all the best in your businesses over this difficult period in the run up to Christmas. Thanks very much, and goodbye for now.